I never expected that a citywide power outage would change my life. But that's exactly what happened when the man who worked on classic cars asked me to hold a light. My name is Lucas, and for the better part of my late 20s, my world was circumscribed by the four walls of my second-floor apartment. I'm a freelance writer, which is a polite way of saying I spend most of my time alone, wrestling with words and deadlines in a perpetual state of low-grade anxiety, fueled by lukewarm coffee. My life ran on a quiet, predictable rhythm: the clack of my keyboard, the hum of the refrigerator, and the distant, muffled sounds of the city. It was a life of observation, not participation. A safe life, and, if I was being honest with myself in the dead of night, a lonely one. The building itself was old, a brick fourplex with apartments on the top 2 floors and commercial spaces on the ground level. My unit was situated directly above an auto repair shop. Not one of those loud, chaotic places with cars lined up down the street, but something more specific, more artisanal. It was a restoration garage, owned and operated by one man who specialized in bringing classic American muscle cars back to life. His name was Julian. I learned that from a piece of mail I once picked up for him that had been mistakenly delivered to my box. Julian. The name felt solid, grounded, much like the man himself. From my perch at my writing desk, which faced the courtyard behind our building, I had a clear view of the garage's wide, open bay doors. And for 2 years, Julian had been a constant, peripheral figure in my daily diorama. He was the kind of man you noticed, not just because he was handsome, which he unequivocally was, but because of the way he moved. There was an economy and a confidence to his actions, whether he was hoisting an engine block or meticulously polishing a piece of chrome. He worked with a focused intensity that I, a professional procrastinator, found both fascinating and intimidating. In the summer, he'd often work without a shirt, his back a tanned and sculpted landscape, usually slick with a thin sheen of sweat and smudged with grease. I watched him more than I was proud of. I saw him laugh with the owners who came to check on their cars, a deep, easy sound that carried up to my open window. I saw him get frustrated, running a hand through his dark, thick hair when a part wouldn't fit. I saw him at the end of the day, leaning against a half-finished Ford Mustang, drinking a beer as the sun went down, lost in thought. He was a puzzle of tangible, masculine reality that existed just below my quiet, abstract world of words. In my mind, he was from a different universe. He was a man who worked with his hands, who understood the tangible logic of engines and steel. I was a man who worked with concepts, with the frustratingly malleable substance of language. He seemed so effortlessly self-assured, so much a part of the real, physical world. He was, I assumed, straight. It was a safe assumption, a default setting that kept my daydreams from getting too ambitious. We were neighbors, nothing more. We exchanged the occasional nod in the hallway, a brief, meaningless acknowledgement of shared space. He was the guy downstairs. I was the quiet writer upstairs. And that was the extent of it. Life has a funny way of taking the walls you've carefully constructed around yourself and knocking them down with a single, unforeseen event. That's how life works sometimes, isn't it? You build a routine, you settle into your comfortable little box, and you think you know the shape of your world. And then the lights go out. It started with a flicker. I was staring at a blinking cursor on a blank page, trying to conjure a sentence from the ether, when my desk lamp sputtered once, twice, and then died. The ambient glow of my monitor vanished a second later, plunging the room into the dusky gloom of a late summer evening. Outside, the steady hum of the city seemed to falter, replaced by a strange and sudden silence. A quick look out the window confirmed it. The entire block was dark. No streetlights, no glowing windows in the building across the way. A real, proper blackout. My first thought was a mild annoyance. I had a deadline. My second thought was a flicker of something else, a primal unease at the sudden imposition of darkness and quiet. I found a couple of candles, their weak, dancing flames casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The silence in the apartment was absolute. No refrigerator hum, no electronic whirring, just the sound of my own breathing. I was standing in the middle of my living room, wondering what to do next, when I heard it. A heavy, purposeful tread on the exterior metal staircase that led to my floor. It was an unfamiliar sound. Deliveries never came this late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door, A moment of silence, and then a firm, solid knock. My heart did a little jump. I wasn't used to visitors, especially not unannounced ones in the middle of a power outage. I moved to the door, peering through the peephole. The distorted, fisheye view showed a broad-shouldered silhouette, backlit by the faint gray light of the evening sky. It was him. It was Julian. I opened the door. He stood there, looking even larger and more solid in the dim hallway than he did from my window. He was wearing a grease-stained t-shirt and jeans, and his hands were dark with his work. His hair was a mess, and there was a smudge of black on his cheek he was clearly unaware of. He looked tired, and for the first time, I saw a hint of frustration in his eyes. "Hey," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was deeper than I'd imagined. "Sorry to bother you. You're Lucas, right?" I nodded, my own voice seemingly having abandoned me. "I'm Julian," from downstairs, as if I didn't know. As if I hadn't spent countless hours watching him bring automotive ghosts back to life. "Yeah, hi," I finally managed to say. "Crazy this outage, huh? Tell me about it," he said, letting out a heavy sigh. He ran a hand over his face, leaving a faint dark streak on his forehead. "Look, this is a weird question, but I'm in a real bind. I've got a deadline to get a '67 Mustang ready for a show this weekend. It's a surprise for my old man. I was in the middle of the final engine tuning when everything went black." He gestured vaguely back down the stairs. "My main breaker in my own apartment tripped hard, and I can't even get into my place. I was wondering, do you happen to have any good, bright flashlights? Or like a camping lantern? Anything battery-powered? The light on my phone is useless for what I need to do." My mind raced. Flashlights. I had a small one in a kitchen drawer, probably with dead batteries. And then I remembered. Tucked away in my hall closet was a box of emergency supplies my mom had insisted I keep. In it were 2 heavy-duty LED lanterns. They were ridiculously bright, meant for camping or long-term power failures. "Actually," I said, a strange impulse taking hold. "I think I do. Let me check." I left him standing in the doorway and retrieved the lanterns from the closet. I clicked one on. It flooded the dark hallway with a clean, white light that made us both blink. "Whoa," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time. It transformed his entire expression, softening the tired lines around his eyes. "That's perfect. That's more than perfect. You're a lifesaver, man. I just need to borrow one for a few hours, I promise." And that's when I said the words that would pivot my quiet, observational life in an entirely new direction. I could have just handed him the lantern and gone back to my candlelit solitude. That would have been the safe thing to do, the normal thing. But looking at him, standing there so determined and tangible and real, I didn't want to be safe or normal. "You know," I heard myself say, the voice sounding braver than I felt, "I've got nothing else going on. And I've got 2 of these. I could come down and hold one for you, if you need an extra set of hands." Julian looked surprised. He studied my face for a long moment in the stark light of the lantern, and I felt suddenly self-conscious. I was the pale rider in his socks and comfortable pants, offering to help a master mechanic. It was absurd. I was about to backtrack, to laugh it off as a stupid idea, but then he nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, that smile returning, a little smaller this time, a little more curious. "Yeah, man, that would actually be a huge help. Thanks." And just like that, I followed him down the stairs and into his world. The garage was cavernous in the darkness, a cathedral of steel and oil. The air was thick with the smells I was used to from a distance: gasoline, metal, soap, and something uniquely Julian, a scent I couldn't quite place. He took one lantern and set it on a workbench, bathing a corner of the space in a brilliant circle of light. In the center of the garage, looking like a sleeping beast, was the Mustang. It was beautiful, a deep, glossy midnight blue. "She's almost there," Julian said, his voice softer now, filled with a reverence that surprised me. He ran a hand along the fender, his greasy fingers leaving no mark on the perfect finish. "Just a few more adjustments to the carburetor." He handed me the second lantern. "If you could just stand here," he said, positioning me by the open hood, "and shine the light right down in there." Yeah, just like that. I did as he asked, my world shrinking to the circle of light I was casting into the complex, beautiful chaos of the engine. The next couple of hours passed in a strange, focused intimacy. My job was simple: hold the light steady. But from that vantage point, I became a silent partner in his work. I watched his hands move with an ingrained certainty, deftly navigating the maze of wires and hoses. They were strong hands, calloused and stained, but they were precise, gentle even, as he made minute adjustments with a screwdriver or a wrench. He worked mostly in silence, completely absorbed, but occasionally he'd let out a soft curse under his breath or a grunt of satisfaction. And slowly, tentatively, we began to talk. He asked me what I did, and I told him I was a writer. I braced for the usual follow-up questions, the polite but dismissive, "Oh, anything I would have read?" But he just nodded. "That's cool," he said, not looking up from the engine. "Must be tough, staring at a blank page." "I think I'd rather wrestle with a seized bolt any day." He asked me what I wrote, and I found myself telling him about the historical fiction novel I was struggling with, something I rarely talked about with anyone. He listened, really listened, asking thoughtful questions between the clicks and turns of his tools. Then, I asked him about the car. That's when the walls really began to come down. "This was my grandfather's car," he said, his voice dropping a little. He finally paused his work, leaning against the fender and looking at the engine as if it held his entire family history. "He bought it new in '67. My dad learned to drive in it. All our family road trips. They were in this car." He told me his grandfather had passed away a few years ago and left the rusting, neglected car to his father, who didn't have the time or money to fix it. It just sat in his parents' garage, a slow decay of memories. "My dad's 60th birthday is next month," Julian continued, his gaze distant. "He thinks the car is still sitting there, collecting dust. He has no idea I towed it here a year ago. I've been pouring every spare dime and every free hour into this. I want to see his face when I hand him the keys. I want to give him some of those good memories back, you know." In that moment, under the artificial glare of a battery-powered lantern in a silent, darkened city, my perception of Julian completely fractured and reformed. The confident, untouchable car guy I had watched from my window dissolved, replaced by this man with a deep, sentimental heart, a man driven by a profound love for his family. He wasn't just fixing a car. He was resurrecting a legacy. A vulnerability lay beneath that capable exterior, a tenderness that I felt an immediate and powerful connection to. He wasn't from another universe at all. He was right here, and he was more real than anyone I had met in a very long time. He went back to work, a renewed determination in his movements. I kept holding the light, my arm starting to ache from holding the position, but I didn't care. The silence between us now was different. It wasn't empty. It was comfortable, charged with the weight of his confession. We were two people sharing a small circle of light in a vast darkness. He needed to reach a bolt deep on the side of the engine block, in a spot that was nearly impossible to see. He had a specific wrench for it, a long, slender tool. As he was maneuvering it into the tight space, it slipped from his greasy fingers, clattering down into the engine's guts. "Damn it," he muttered. He tried to reach for it, his larger hand unable to fit into the gap. Can you see if you can grab it? Your hands are smaller." I leaned in closer, the scent of him and the warm metal filling my senses. I angled the lantern with one hand and reached down with the other, my fingers brushing against cool, oily surfaces until I felt the wrench. As I pulled it out, my hand brushed against his as I passed it back to him. It was the briefest of contacts, my skin against his. But the contrast was electric. His hand was rough, calloused, and warm, coated in a thin layer of oil. Mine felt impossibly soft and pale in comparison. A current, small but distinct, passed between us. We both pulled our hands back a little too quickly. He cleared his throat and looked away, back at the engine. "Thanks," he mumbled. I just nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a tiny, insignificant moment. An accident, but it felt like anything but. The real turning point, the moment that would echo in my mind for days to come, happened about an hour later. We were nearing the end. There was one last adjustment to be made, on a tiny screw located in a deeply awkward position underneath a series of hoses. It required one hand to hold a part in place while the other turned the screw, and a third hand to hold the light perfectly steady on the target. We were short one hand. "Okay," he said, his voice low with concentration. "This is the tricky part. I need you to get the light in really close, right on the head of that screw. See it?" I leaned over the fender, positioning the lantern as best I could, my arms stretched at an awkward angle. The beam of light danced around as my muscles trembled with fatigue. "Gotta be steady, Lucas," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "I can't see a thing if it's moving." "I'm trying," I said, my voice strained. "It's a weird angle." "Here," he said, his voice now right beside my ear. I felt his presence behind me, a wall of warmth. "Let me help." I expected him to take the lantern from me, to try and prop it up on something. But he didn't. Instead, he reached around me, his body pressing lightly against my back. And instead of taking the light, he simply covered my hand with his. His hand was large and warm, and it completely enveloped mine. His palm covered my knuckles, his fingers wrapping around my own, his thumb resting near my wrist. It was not a guiding touch. It was a holding touch. He wasn't just steadying the light. He was holding my hand. Through me, he aimed the beam, a perfect, unwavering circle of white on the tiny, crucial screw. My entire world contracted to the feeling of his hand on mine, the solidness of his chest against my back, the soft sound of his breathing next to my ear. My own breath caught in my throat. I could feel the rhythmic beat of his heart through his chest, or maybe it was my own, thundering in my ears. The scent of him was overwhelming, that mix of clean soap and honest work. The garage, the car, the power outage, it all faded away into a blurry background. He made the adjustment, the faint click of the screwdriver the only sound in the charged silence. It probably only took 10 seconds. But he didn't let go. For a long, suspended moment after the work was done, we remained exactly as we were. His hand stayed firm around mine. His body stayed pressed against my back. It was a question, hanging there in the darkness. A silent, terrifying, beautiful question. Every nerve in my body was screaming. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just existed inside that moment, willing it to last forever. Then, as if waking from a dream, he slowly, reluctantly, withdrew his hand. He stepped back. The warmth at my back vanished, and I felt suddenly cold despite the humid night air. "There," he said, his voice a little hoarse. "That should do it." Just then, as if on cue from some cosmic director, the overhead fluorescent lights in the garage flickered once, hummed, and then buzzed to life, flooding the entire space with a harsh, unforgiving institutional glare. The power was back. The spell was broken. We both blinked in the sudden brightness, like two creatures startled out of a cave. The intimate world created by our two small lanterns was gone, replaced by the stark reality of a working garage. Everything looked mundane again. The magic was gone. "Well, look at that," he said, forcing a casualness into his tone that didn't quite land. Perfect timing. He started gathering his tools, his movements suddenly brisk and efficient, avoiding my eyes. I stood there, lantern still in my hand, feeling exposed and utterly confused. "Yeah," I said, my own voice thin. "I guess I should. I should get back upstairs. Right? Hey, I can't thank you enough, Lucas. Seriously. I never would have finished tonight without your help." He finally looked at me, but his gaze was guarded. The vulnerability from before was gone, replaced by a polite, neighborly distance. It was like a shutter had been drawn. "It was no problem," I said, trying to match his tone. "Glad I could help." I handed him his borrowed lantern and turned to leave, my heart feeling like a lead weight in my chest. Did I imagine it all? Did I invent that moment of connection out of my own loneliness and wishful thinking? The walk back up the stairs to my apartment felt like a mile. The next few days were a special kind of torture. My apartment was no longer a quiet sanctuary. It was a holding cell of anxiety. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound from the garage below, sent a jolt through my system. I replayed the moment in the garage 1,000 times, examining it from every possible angle until it lost all meaning. His hand on mine, the pressure, the warmth, the way he held on for that extra second. It had to mean something, right? But then the counter-argument would rush in, vicious and logical. He was just steadying the light. It was practical. I was a lonely guy reading way too much into a simple, functional gesture. He was being friendly, and I was turning it into a romance novel in my head. The thought was humiliating. I was pathetic. I found myself both avoiding and seeking out the window that overlooked the garage. I'd sit at my desk, determined not to look, only to find my gaze drifting down there minutes later. I saw him once, washing his hands at the industrial sink in the corner of the garage. He glanced up, his eyes sweeping across the building, and for a split second, they seemed to meet mine before I ducked away from the window, my face burning with shame. Our hallway encounters became excruciating. The day after the blackout, I practically ran into him on the landing. "Hey," he said, and the simple word was so loaded with unspoken things that I could barely meet his eyes. "Hey." I mumbled back, fumbling with my keys and rushing into my apartment, my heart pounding. The air between us was thick with a new awareness. The easy anonymity of being neighbors was gone, replaced by this fragile, terrifying tension. I was caught in a miserable limbo between hope and the certainty of rejection. Hope that the connection I felt was real, and the fear that I had completely and utterly imagined it. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing days. I was convinced I had scared him off, that my own longing had been so palpable he had felt it and was now actively avoiding me. I decided I just had to forget it, to chalk it up to a weird, electrically charged night and move on. I would go back to my quiet life. I would watch him from a distance, and he would remain the handsome, untouchable guy downstairs. It was safer that way. Then, on the 4th evening, there was a knock on my door. It was the same firm, solid knock from the night of the blackout. My blood turned to ice. For a moment, I considered not answering. I could pretend I wasn't home. I could hide. But my feet carried me to the door against my will. I took a deep breath and opened it. It was Julian. He wasn't in his work clothes. He was wearing a clean pair of jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. He had showered. His hair was still slightly damp. In one hand, he was holding a 6-pack of beer, the bottles beaded with condensation. He looked profoundly nervous. The easy confidence I was used to seeing was gone, replaced by the same uncertainty I had been drowning in for days. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. He held up the beer. "Peace offering. Or, a thank you. For the other night." "You don't have to do that," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "I know," he said. Can I come in for a minute?" I stepped back and let him in, closing the door behind him. He walked into the center of my living room and just stood there, looking around as if he'd never seen an apartment before. The silence was deafening. He set the beers down on my coffee table with a soft clink. "Look, Lucas," he started, turning to face me. He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into cold water. "I need to be straight with you." Which is, kind of a funny way to start this. I guess a small, nervous smile flickered on his lips and then vanished. The other night was. I've been a wreck since the other night. My heart stopped. Here it comes, I thought. The "let's just be friends" speech. The "I'm not like that" clarification. I braced myself. "I've lived in this building for 2 years, he continued, his eyes locked on mine. "And I've seen you. At your window. I have a window in my place that looks right back across the courtyard. I've seen you writing, or just staring out. And I've wanted to say something, to properly introduce myself, for months. But I didn't know how. I kept chickening out. This was not what I was expecting." My brain struggled to process his words. He had seen me. He had wanted to talk to me. "The power outage wasn't an excuse," he said quickly, as if he needed to make that clear. "I really was in a bind. But when I knocked on your door, it felt like an opportunity one couldn't waste. And when you offered to come down and help, I couldn't believe it." He paused, swallowing hard. "And then, in the garage, when I was holding your hand," he trailed off, shaking his head slightly. "I didn't need to hold your hand that long to tighten a bolt, Lucas. I didn't need to hold it at all, probably. I wanted to. And I haven't been able to think about anything else since." The air rushed back into my lungs. A tidal wave of relief and disbelief washed over me. He had felt it too. It was real. "I haven't either," I admitted, the words coming out on a shaky exhale. I thought I imagined the whole thing. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the one I had seen from my window but had never had directed at me. It lit up his entire face, and it was aimed right at me. "You didn't imagine it," he said softly. He took a step closer, closing the small distance between us. The air grew thick and warm again. "I'm not very good at this stuff," he confessed. "Words. I'm better with engines." "I'm supposed to be good with words," I replied, a laugh escaping me. "But I have no idea what to say right now." "Good," he whispered, now only inches away. "Maybe we don't need words." And then he leaned in and he kissed me. It wasn't like the movies. It was slow, and hesitant at first, a question, but it was also sure and solid and real. It was a kiss that tasted faintly of beer and toothpaste and felt like the end of a long, lonely wait. It was gentle and strong, and in the warm light of my living room, it felt like coming home. The weeks that followed felt like learning a new language, one that was spoken in shared glances, easy laughter, and comfortable silences. My life expanded beyond my four walls and down the metal staircase into his. I spent evenings in the garage, not as a helper, but as a companion. I'd sit on a stool, nursing a beer, and he'd tell me about the personality of a carburetor or the history of a specific model of car, his passion making the technical jargon sound like poetry. He would work, and I would write, the clack of my keyboard replaced by the rhythmic sound of his tools, a soundtrack I had once found distracting, but now found deeply comforting. He started coming upstairs, too. He'd show up at my door after a long day, smelling of grease and soap, and we'd order takeout and sit on my couch. He'd ask me to read to him from what I was working on. At first, I was terrified, but he listened with such genuine, quiet interest that my self-consciousness melted away. He didn't just hear the words. He seemed to understand the heart behind them. We were learning the shapes of each other's worlds and finding that they weren't so different after all. They fit together. A month later, the Mustang was finished. It gleamed under the garage lights, a perfect monument to his love and skill. The day he was going to drive it to his father's house, he came and got me. "Come with me," he said. For the first ride, we got in, the smell of new leather and old memories filling the car. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life with a deep, satisfying rumble. He pulled out of the garage and onto the street, the late afternoon sun glinting off the polished chrome. He drove with one hand on the wheel, an easy smile on his face. A few blocks later, as we sat at a stoplight, he reached across the console and took my hand. He didn't say anything. He just laced his fingers through mine and placed our joined hands on the gear shift. It was a mirror of that first, charged moment in the darkness, but now there was no tension, no uncertainty. There was just a simple, profound rightness. It was a gesture that said, "You belong here. We belong here." I used to think that the sounds from the garage below were just noise, the background static of someone else's life intruding on my own. But I was wrong. It was never noise. It was the sound of a heart beating, of a passion taking shape, of a life being lived fully and with purpose. I just needed the world to go dark for a moment to finally be able to see the light, to understand that all along, he wasn't just the man downstairs. He was my future, and all I had to do was be brave enough to step out of the shadows and help him hold the light.